Hello and welcome to another code breakdown. I'm Drew DuPont from Uptech Studio, and today I wanted to continue our series on state-based testing versus behavioral testing and our exploration of the values of it. Last time we talked about the ability to gain confidence when refactoring, and we explored whether or not state-based tests provide that to us or behavioral tests provide that to us. We also covered in the previous episode, a little bit about the difference between what a state-based test is and a behavioral test is. So if you need to get up to speed, please go check out the previous video. But in this video, we want to talk about testing internal collaboration as a value. And we want to explore whether or not state-based testing provides that, or whether or not behavioral testing provides that, and to what degree. So the best way to do that is for us to go play around with some code like we did before. And so we have the same example we did in the previous episode. We have the salutations class. If we look at that, it's the simple contrived example, but it has a few different collaborators. And importantly, it has two collaborators that are non-effectful collaborators, and then it has a third collaborator that is effectful, and that is the mailer, right? You can imagine sending an email is a side effect, so that has external effects within the system, whereas the greeter's responsibility is just to take in some data, do some computations, and create a greeting. And the other one is simply a user object, which is the other collaborator. So let's go back and look at our tests real quick. So we have our salutation spec, we have our test suite, we can verify all our tests are passing. And if you recall from the first episode, we have 3 Machus tests covering the salutations class and its arrival function here. And then we have 3 state-based tests that are testing the same thing, but in 3 different strategies. One is using the just spy functionality to mock out, or really stub out, the send method on a real mailer and track whether or not we have called it appropriately, so we can do this expectation in the end. And then we have, Then we have the classical test here, where we do this with a fake. And so a fake is just like a dummy mailer class that we created that abides by the same interface as it. And in this case, it's got the send message that takes the message, and we just have this internal array that we store and push the message onto. And that allows us to, in our expectations, verify not only that we get the expected message as a return type, but that the mailer will receive that message and that the message matches what we expect, right? And then our third strategy was where we constructed an actual mock object that abides by that interface, and then injected that. And then we were able to use this, and we'll switch the order of those expectations because I think it's nicer. We'll able to verify that the returned message is correct and that it interacts with the mock mailer send method the way we expect. And so all of these are accomplishing the same thing in 3 different ways. Okay? So we have some state-based tests and we have some behavioral tests. And we're trying to understand which of those tests give us the value of telling us about changes to internal collaboration within the implementation. So let's look at the salutations code. Let's start by refactoring this, because we need to keep the same external behavior, because what we're worried about right now is telling us about internal behavior, and we don't want to be misled by changes in external behavior causing like the classical tests to fail when they shouldn't, right? So to keep the same behavior, let's refactor this so that we comment out the use of the user collaborator and the use of the greeter collaborator, and instead we create our own greeting where we say hello and we give it the name. So we've stopped collaborating with the greeter and the user, and we have now just created our own greeting inline right here, and then we are passing that to the mailer, right? Fantastic. So let's go back to our test suite and let's run our tests. All right, so we got 3 failed tests. My assumption right now is that those 3 failed tests are all mockist or behavioral tests, but we'll run through them to make sure, and we'll make sure we understand why they're failing. So the first one is a mockist behavioral test. It's the collaborates with the greeter's hello method. It's the first one we're looking at here on the left. And it's failing because it expected mock greeter hello to have been called with name hoopty. And we know we just changed that collaboration, and that collaboration is no longer being called. We're no longer using the greeter at all. And therefore, this expectation is failing as we expect. So this case, it is notifying us about a change to the internal collaborators. Okay? So let's go down to the second one. The second one is a mockist behavioral test, and this is the collaborates with the mailer send method. And this one is failing, but this one is failing for a different reason. This is failing because if we look at this test, we have a mock greeter with the hello method that is stubbed to return something, some username. Then we have a mock mailer, and our expectation is that the mock mailer send method is to be called with the argument something, some username. And we changed that internal behavior of those collaborators. We are no longer taking the output from the hello function of the greeter and plugging it into the mailer send method. Instead, we've created our own greeting inline and are handing that into the mailer. And so this, again, is telling us that we changed how our collaborators are interacting with each other internally. So we have another mockist or behavioral test that is telling us and giving us that value. Okay, let's look at the third failure. It's a mockist behavioral test, and it returns the result of the greeter hello method. And so if we look at this one, we can see the failure is that it expected to receive it expected the received value to equal that. And so it's complaining that something, some username, which is what was expected, does not match hello hoopty, which is what it got. And if we look at the test, we can see our test originally was trying to show that the return value of the greeter is what we should get out of the arrival function. And that is clearly not happening anymore because we changed that internal collaboration. Because now we're generating our own message inline and handing that to the mailer and then returning that. And therefore they do not match. And so again, our mockist behavioral tests are telling us when the internal collaboration changes. And that's it. Those are all the failed tests. So our state-based tests are testing the external behavior, not the internal behavior. They're testing the result, but they don't care about the internals, at least with respect to the changes that we just made. And so let's take a look at the changes we just made and look at them a little bit more carefully and see why that is. What's interesting about this is that neither of these collaborators are effectful. So we do still have one collaborator in here which is effectful, and we could actually get rid of that. We could get rid of that collaboration, that internal collaboration as well, and say, okay, we don't want to interact with this effectful mailer anymore. We don't want to send this greeting, right? Now, what's interesting about that is that I suspect that our state-based tests will now fail. And the reason that I suspect our state-based tests will now fail is that our state-based tests are interested in the state of the system, not just the state of the function. So if you're calling a function that is interacting with an effectful collaborator, then the state-based tests are aware of those effectful collaborators and those interactions as well. So let's try this out real quick, just to see if our understanding is correct. And go back to our test suite, run our whole test suite, and now all of a sudden 6 tests fail. And that's all 6 tests in this suite. If we look at these tests, we can look and we have the mockest one, the mockest one, the mockest one for the same reasons they were failing before. But then all of a sudden we have a classical state-based test. The first classical state-based test right here is failing, where we had this new mailer and the spy. And this is failing because it expected, what do we got? We have sends greeting email and returns greeting for Bob with spy. Okay, and this expectation is failing. Spy mailer to have been called with hello Bob, and it was called 0 times. And that's correct because we had a mailer and we have an expectation that that mailer was called with hello Bob, right? Called the send method on the mailer with hello Bob. And it was not called because we just changed that internal collaboration. Okay, so the reason that this test is failing now and it was not failing before is because this is a classical test, and the classical tests only interact with effectful collaborators. They do not interact with all collaborators. They just interact with effectful collaborators. Let's take a look at the next one. Okay, so we have the next one. The next one's failing because it expected the mailer messages length to equal 1, but it equals 0, telling us again that the email was not sent. In this one, we have the fake mailer, and we plug that in, and we can see that it still has the correct message, but our length is incorrect on the mailer, so it did not send the email. And that again is because in a state-based test, we are testing the resulting state of the system, not just the return value of the function. And so that means that if we have effectful collaborators, we have to test the state of the system, which includes the resulting state of those effectful collaborators as well, which in this case is the mailer, and we just changed that internal collaboration. So we're notified in this case as well. Let's look at the last one that failed right here, and we can see that this one is failing because it expected to have the mock mailer send method called with that argument, and it was called 0 times. And let's look. So we have the mock mailer that gets injected. We call the method. The message is correct, but send was not called when it was expected to be called. For the same reason, because we removed that internal collaboration, and that internal collaboration happened to be effectful. So let's jump back to our slides and let's see what we learned. What are the things that we learned? We learned that behavioral tests notify us of changes to all internal collaborations, assuming you have complete behavioral test coverage. And we learned that state-based tests notify us of changes to only effectful internal collaboration, assuming you have test coverage. Did we learn anything else? I think that's it in relation to internal collaboration. So we need to be aware of effectful versus non-effectful. And I will update this in the summary that I'm putting together, which you can see in the README. So I'm starting to put together a table. This is a list of the various things we need to cover and notes around them, but I'm going to start to put together a table where we can explore all of these and keep track of the values that each of them address, whether we're talking about state-based or behavioral using mock objects or behavioral using mocks of real objects. But yeah, so I'll update that and we can move on to the next one next time. So until then, hope you enjoyed. See you in the next code breakdown.